Welcome back to Thrive, your go-to channel for transforming health, revolutionizing indoor air quality, and visionary environments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below to let us know your thoughts. Here's Geoff Hanmer speaking on future prospects and current issues in building ventilation, school ventilation in Australia.
So now I'd like to introduce the next speaker. Actually, there are two speakers, but as I understand it, only one will be speaking, which is Geoff. Now, Geoff, you may not realize that this session, in a way, is something which kind of started in my mind based on some of your questions last year at a Zoom. You were on Zoom. We had a meeting then in Brisbane. And there was about energy, and you started probing something about the energy, that's spending a little bit more energy, whatever you put there. And then I started writing your comments over Zoom. Then Jason got part of that discussion, and that discussion went on for a number of days after this. So I diligently, and that were great ideas, I diligently took all this and created a document. That was, in a way, an embryo of this meeting. So with this, Geoff, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lydia. Thank you. I'll try not to look behind me. So, welcome everyone. Oh, wow. There we go. Right. So, next slide, please. This is a very brief presentation about future prospects for ventilation of buildings, with a particular focus on schools. Next slide, please. So we've now had 40 plus months of research into the pandemic, and the number of papers available is now more than I can read. So many papers are arriving that it's just an impossible amount of information, but eventually I guess we'll be able to digest all of this. Next slide, please. Early in the pandemic, we didn't really know what was happening. And to be honest, I didn't know much about building ventilation other than the stuff I was taught in architecture school and the arguments I'd had with mechanical engineers over the years about air conditioning systems in buildings, because I'm an architect. But when we started to have a lot of people get infected in nursing homes in Victoria during the second wave in particular, I did put my mind to what was causing this, because I thought there must be some reason this is happening. And after a fairly limited amount of investigation using satellite photographs and press photographs, I came to the conclusion that the reason this was happening is because these were naturally ventilated buildings under the National Construction Code, our National Construction Code, and they had their windows shut. That was it. Next slide, please. So when we look at the data of what went wrong, where the super spreader events are, and sorry, this is a bit small, but you can see there that most of the super spreader events are actually in aged care buildings, which are naturally ventilated under the National Construction Code with their windows shut. What's the requirement under the National Construction Code to constitute natural ventilation? Can anyone tell me?
Talk about the opening. Yes, please. 5%. 5%.
5%. Rafat, top of the class. I know. So yes, that's right. It's 5%, but based on the area of the room, not its occupancy. Next slide, please. So I became a bit concerned about schools because, of course, at the stage we did the work on aged care, most schools were operating in hybrid mode, and so they had people at schools, but the loads weren't great because most of the classes were online. My concern was when classes went back, we would have super spreader events, so we wrote this article and said, look, open the windows, which was a good start. Next slide, please. But it wasn't enough. So we did some calculations and we figured out that in actual fact, in a typical classroom, the NCC requirements for ventilation would produce about half as much ventilation as was required. And it wouldn't do that reliably because it depended on what the weather conditions were. And if it was raining, people would shut the windows. If it was cold, people would shut the windows. If it was hot, people would shut the windows. And so DTS natural ventilation under the NCC is sort of fundamentally not really a good solution for things like schools because they have high occupancy. And natural ventilation doesn't respond to load. So next slide, please. Just to illustrate that, here's an office with one person in it. Next slide, please. Here's a classroom. Next slide, please. Here's the assembly hall. Next slide, please. And so we can see that the ratio between the worst and the best is quite high. In fact, in the worst case, it's about 20 to 1. So natural ventilation, as it's enshrined in the NCC, is not an effective way of ventilating schools. Next slide, please. We've tended to design schools a bit like this one. They're very deep. So the area in the middle is allegedly ventilated by the windows on the perimeter. But as you can appreciate, the level of ventilation in the middle of these schools is extremely poor. But that's quite legal under the National Construction Code. Next slide, please. So it doesn't, natural ventilation doesn't respond to load. I've tried to think of anything else we can do, but in actual fact, we actually need to focus on introducing mechanical ventilation into schools because that's the only way that we're going to solve this problem. And it will also help us solve the problem with bushfires and particulates generally. So there was a reason that people invented HVAC many years ago, and this is the reason. So the challenge that was thrown down to us at the Clean Air Forum at Parliament House was, well, prove that this is a good thing to do. Prove that it makes economic sense, prove that it works, and so on, which is exactly the sort of questions you'd expect policymakers to ask. So since then, I have been thinking about this problem, which is quite a complex one. And recently, we've had some very interesting articles, which one on the left, I'm sure you're all familiar with, one on the right, I encourage you to read. But they're showing us that in actual fact, by improving ventilation, we are reducing the risk of catching all sorts of airborne diseases, including SARS-CoV-2. Next one, please. So what we've done, ARINA, my firm, is to investigate 60 schools. And these are all naturally ventilated schools in southern New South Wales and the ACT. We just happened to be doing master planning work on all of these schools at the time, so we thought, oh, well, make this doubly worthwhile. This is our base school, if you like. It's a mechanically ventilated school, mechanically ventilated and air-conditioned school. It's mechanically ventilated because it's under the flight path, and so the government ventilated it to stop the noise of aircraft interrupting classes. Next slide, please. It performs really well. So it's got excellent performance. Next slide, please. So under normal load, which we've defined as 26 students, a teacher and teaching assistant, we're struggling to get levels above 750 ppm in that building. Here's an example of adequate ventilation. This is the language we're beginning to develop in terms of graphing all of these results. Keep going with that. So the naturally ventilated classrooms were all pretty terrible. I mean, it was common to see well over 1,500 ppm and some room with 2,500 ppm. So we get this marginal ventilation scenario. So the question is, what happens if we do something about this? What if we retrofit schools to provide mechanical ventilation? Next slide, please. So this is the tricky bit. The research that we've got suggests that we can reduce the chance of transmission of airborne diseases by a significant degree. On the right-hand side, highlighted in yellow, are a number of graphs, which this is 2003 paper, so it's quite old. You probably know this paper very well, but it is really interesting because it shows the decrease in the probability of transmission varies very strongly with ventilation as measured by CO2. Next slide, please. So, well, okay, how do we look at this? Sick leave in Australia is worth about 40 billion a year to the economy, and it's gone up since the start of COVID. So 38% rise in sick leave since COVID, averaged across all industries. So if we were able to provide better ventilation to schools, which means mechanical ventilation, 11% of the workforce have children. And so if we look at the impact on them, and assuming no spillovers to friends, relatives, grandparents, all the rest of it, then we can make some assumptions about costs. Next slide, please. So big news, we might reasonably expect to save at least $3.59 billion a year in sick leave. That's without thinking about any other beneficial effects. Now, the cost of actually mechanically ventilating every school in Australia, we'd already costed at about $2 billion per year over 5 years. So, as you can see, there's every chance that the mechanically ventilating schools is actually going to have a very positive benefit cost. And so this is the work that we're trying to do now to push this forward. This is not a definitive analysis. It's far from it, but at least it gives us the optimism to keep moving forward with this work. Thank you very much.